I abandoned my blind son. 50 years later, I finally told him the truth. They say time heals all wounds, but some scars never fade. For 50 years, I carried a secret so heavy that it nearly destroyed everything I built. My son didn't know the real reason I left when he was just 3 days old. He didn't know that I was too scared, too broken, too ashamed to face what his blindness meant for my life. But one phone call changed everything. One conversation that I never thought would happen. One truth that finally set us both free. And when he heard it, his response shattered me in ways I never expected. Before I can explain how all this happened, it's very important that you like and subscribe to the channel. That will help us a lot. Only then can we continue. Our future is in your hands. Now let's get back to this incredible story. My name is Margaret. This is how I lost everything. My name is Margaret, and I'm 84 years old. I live in a small house in San Antonio, Texas, just blocks away from where I spent most of my life running away from the truth. People who know me today think I'm a kind woman, a grandmother, someone who volunteers at the church and bakes cookies for the neighborhood kids. They don't know that I'm also a woman who abandoned her son the moment she realized he would never see the world the way she saw it. It was 1974 when my first child was born. His name was Marcus. I remember the hospital room like it was yesterday. The smell of antiseptic, the pale yellow walls, the way my husband Robert stood by the window, his face glowing with pride. The doctor placed Marcus in my arms, and for exactly 3 minutes, I felt the most intense joy I had ever experienced. He was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a small cry that sounded like music. Then the pediatrician came back into the room. Her face was different, serious. She asked us to sit down, and she told us something that would change the trajectory of my entire existence. Marcus was born with a condition called retinitis pigmentosa. It meant his eyes were not developing properly. It meant that as he grew, his vision would deteriorate. Eventually, he would be completely blind. I don't remember much after that. I remember Robert squeezing my hand. I remember the doctor saying there was no cure, that medical science was still exploring options, that with support and resources, Marcus could live a normal life. I remember nodding like I understood, but I didn't understand. I didn't understand at all. 3 days later, I signed the papers to give my son to the adoption agency. I told Robert I couldn't do it, that I wasn't strong enough, that having a blind child would ruin both our lives. Robert begged me not to do it. He cried. He told me we could make it work, that our son deserved a chance, that love was enough. But I was too afraid. I was too young. I was too selfish. I walked out of that hospital with empty arms and a broken heart that I would spend the next 50 years pretending didn't exist. If you've ever made a decision you immediately regretted, please share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my position? The first years after I gave Marcus away, I tried to pretend it never happened. Robert and I didn't talk about it. We had agreed, after many sleepless nights and arguments that left us both hollow, that we would move forward. He said he understood, though I could see in his eyes that he didn't. He said we could try again, have another child, build the family we were supposed to have. We did try. In 1976, our daughter Sarah was born. She was healthy, beautiful, and she had perfect vision. I threw myself into motherhood with an intensity that frightened even me. I was determined to be the perfect mother to Sarah. I read every parenting book, attended every school function, made sure she had every advantage. Maybe if I was perfect with her, the universe would forgive me for abandoning Marcus. But the guilt didn't fade. It evolved. It transformed into something darker and more complicated. I would wake up in the middle of the night, gasping, my heart pounding, imagining Marcus somewhere in the world, calling for me. I imagined him confused, wondering why his mother didn't want him. I imagined him growing up in an institution, alone, blind, without anyone to love him. These thoughts became obsessive. They followed me everywhere. To the grocery store, to church, to Sarah's school plays. They whispered to me while I was cooking dinner or lying next to Robert in bed. Robert tried to help at first. He would hold me while I cried, tell me that we made the best decision we could at that time, that Marcus would find a good family. But eventually, his patience wore thin. He had his own pain to process, and I was too consumed by mine to notice. By the early 1980s, our marriage had become a careful dance of avoidance. We were polite to each other. We never raised our voices. But there was no passion, no real connection. We were two people sharing a house and a secret. I started volunteering at the church around that time. I needed to be around people, to feel useful, to convince myself that I was a good person. I organized charity drives. I sang in the choir. I visited sick people in their homes. Everyone thought I was wonderful. They had no idea that I went home at night and looked at myself in the mirror with nothing but disgust. I was a fraud. I was a woman pretending to be virtuous while harboring one of the most selfish acts imaginable. Sarah grew up happy, though she was a quiet child. She seemed to sense the tension between Robert and me, even though we tried hard to hide it. She was obedient, almost too obedient. She never asked for much, never demanded attention, as if she understood that our family was fragile and that any disturbance might cause it to collapse entirely. I loved her fiercely, but I also resented her sometimes, not because of anything she did, but because her presence made my guilt more acute. Every time I looked at her, I was reminded of the child I had abandoned. In 1985, Robert had a heart attack. He survived, but it changed everything. He recovered physically, but emotionally, he became withdrawn. The doctors said stress had contributed to the attack. I knew the stress was about Marcus, about the secret we had been carrying for 11 years. After his recovery, Robert seemed to make peace with what we had done. He stopped bringing it up. He stopped asking if I thought about Marcus. It was as if, faced with his own mortality, he decided that some things were better left buried. I wish I could say I found that same peace. I didn't. Instead, my guilt crystallized into anxiety. I became hypervigilant about my health, convinced that I would die before I could ever make things right. I was terrified of dying with my secret still locked inside me, of leaving Sarah without an explanation for why our family felt so broken, of never having the chance to apologize to Marcus. Have you ever carried a secret that affected your entire life? Please comment below and tell me your story. How did you finally find the courage to face it? The 1990s came, and technology changed rapidly. The internet began to emerge. I remember the first time I saw a computer at the library in San Antonio. I was in my 50s by then, and the world felt like it was moving too fast for me to keep up. But I was also secretly excited. The internet meant that people could find each other. It meant that lost children could locate their birth parents. It meant that my secret might not stay secret for much longer. I didn't actively search for Marcus at first. I told myself it would be selfish, that he had a life, probably a family, and that my reappearance would only cause him pain. But the temptation was always there, lurking beneath the surface. Sometimes late at night, I would turn on the computer and type his name into the search engine. Nothing would come up. I would type retinitis pigmentosa and read articles about the condition, trying to understand what he had experienced growing up, trying to picture his life. Robert passed away in 1998. He had another heart attack, a massive one, and he didn't survive. I was at his bedside when he died. His last words to me were, "Take care of yourself, Margaret, and if you ever get the chance, tell him you're sorry." I held his hand and promised I would, but I was terrified. After 24 years of silence, how could I possibly reach out to Marcus? What right did I have to disrupt his life? Sarah was an adult by then, living in California with her own family. She came home for the funeral, and we sat together in the empty house that had never quite felt like a home. I almost told her the truth then. I almost confessed everything. But I looked at her face, still bearing the weight of our family's unspoken pain, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't add to her burden. So I stayed silent. The years passed. I retired from my volunteer work at the church, though I continued to attend services. I became smaller, quieter, more withdrawn. People still thought I was a kind woman, but I was really just a woman waiting to die, hoping that death would bring the peace that I couldn't find in life. I made myself busy with small things. I gardened. I read books. I watched television. I tried not to think about Marcus, but not thinking about someone is impossible when that person is your son. Before we continue, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Stories like this one need to be heard, and your subscription helps us reach more people who need to hear them. Thank you so much. In 2005, Sarah called me. She said she had something to tell me, and she wanted to do it in person. She drove down from California to see me, and we sat at my kitchen table with cups of coffee that neither of us touched. Sarah took a deep breath and told me that she had done a DNA ancestry test. She had been curious about our family history, and she wanted to know more about her roots. When the results came back, she saw something unexpected. There was a half-sibling listed, a brother, and the DNA match was strong. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. Sarah looked at me and said, "Mom, I think you have another child, a child you never told me about." I couldn't deny it anymore. I couldn't maintain the lie. So I told her everything. I told her about Marcus, about his blindness, about the day I signed him away, about the 50 years of guilt and regret that had defined my existence. Sarah cried. She cried for Marcus, for Robert, for me, for the family that should have been. And then she did something I never expected. She said, "We have to find him, Mom. We have to tell him the truth." I was terrified. What if he didn't want to know me? What if he hated me? What if the truth only brought him pain? But Sarah was determined. She contacted the adoption agency. She traced records. And after weeks of searching, she found him. Marcus was living in Austin, Texas, just an hour away from where I had given birth to him 51 years earlier. He was a lawyer. He had gone to university. He had built a life despite his blindness. He had a wife named Helen and 2 grown children. His life seemed full and complete, and the thought of disrupting it terrified me. But Sarah convinced me that he deserved to know the truth, that he had a right to know his birth mother, that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for redemption. So I wrote him a letter. I poured my heart onto the page. I told him who I was. I told him why I had given him away. I told him that I was sorry. I told him that I understood if he wanted nothing to do with me. And I enclosed my phone number. I waited for 3 weeks without hearing anything. I convinced myself that he had read the letter and decided that I was not worth his time. I convinced myself that this was the outcome I deserved. And then, one evening, my phone rang. "Hello," a man's voice said. "Is this Margaret?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't cry. I could only listen as my son, the child I had abandoned, the person I had thought about every single day for 51 years, asked me one simple question. "Why now?" he said. "Why are you contacting me now?" I don't remember sitting down, but I must have, because my legs gave out beneath me. I was holding the phone to my ear, and my son was asking me why I was contacting him now, and I couldn't think of a single answer that would sound sufficient. How could I possibly explain 51 years of silence? How could I make him understand that I had been running from this moment my entire life? "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry, Marcus." "That's not an answer," he said. His voice was calm, measured, controlled. It was the voice of someone who had learned long ago how to manage his emotions, how to keep himself steady in the face of pain. Why now? What changed? I told him about Sarah finding him through the DNA test. I told him about my husband passing away, about growing older, about realizing that I didn't have much time left and that I couldn't leave this world without telling him the truth. I told him things I had never said out loud before, things that I had only whispered to myself in the dark of night. Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. I thought he was going to hang up. I thought he was going to tell me that he didn't want anything to do with me, that I had forfeited my right to be his mother the moment I abandoned him. But instead, he asked me a different question. "Do you know what it was like?" He said quietly. "Do you have any idea what it was like to grow up knowing that you were unwanted?" I started to cry then. I cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to cry in decades. These weren't silent tears. These were great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep inside me, from a place where I had buried all the pain and all the shame and all the regret that I had accumulated over 51 years. "I don't expect you to forgive me," I said. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I just wanted you to know the truth. I wanted you to know that it wasn't about you. It wasn't because you were defective or broken or less than. It was about me. It was about my weakness, my fear, my inability to be the mother that you deserved." Marcus was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "I want to meet you. I want to look at you. Or rather, I want you to see me. I think we both deserve that much." We agreed to meet on a Saturday afternoon at a coffee shop in downtown Austin. I didn't sleep the night before. I kept thinking about what I would say to him, how I would explain myself, whether my explanations would matter at all. Sarah called me that morning to check on me. She said she would drive down from California to be there for support, but I asked her not to. I told her that this was something Marcus and I needed to do alone. I arrived at the coffee shop 20 minutes early. I sat at a table by the window and waited, my hands trembling so badly that I could barely hold my coffee cup. I watched the sidewalk, searching for him, trying to imagine what he looked like. I had seen his picture once on a website, but that had been years ago, before I closed that tab and tried to pretend I had never looked. At 2 o'clock exactly, a man walked through the door. He was tall, with dark hair and a strong build. He had a cane in one hand, and he was moving with the careful deliberation of someone who was navigating unfamiliar space. But what struck me most was his face. He had my eyes. He had my nose. He looked like the man I had married, like the child I had given birth to, but he also looked like someone entirely his own person. A woman followed him into the coffee shop. She was holding his arm gently, and when she saw me, she gave me a small, sad smile. This must be his wife, Helen. She guided Marcus toward my table, and he sat down across from me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Hello, Margaret," he said finally. He used my first name, not Mom, and I understood that this was intentional. He was establishing boundaries, reminding me that I had forfeited the right to that particular title. "Hello, Marcus," I said. "Thank you for meeting with me." Helen excused herself to give us privacy, though I could see her sitting at another table, keeping watch like a protective guardian. Marcus ordered a coffee, and we sat together in an awkward silence that felt like it lasted forever. "I read your letter," he said. "I read it 3 times. The first time I was angry. The second time I was sad. The third time, I tried to understand." "Did you?" I asked. "Understand?" "No," he said. "Not really. But I'm trying. I'm trying to understand how a mother can give birth to a child and then just walk away. I'm trying to understand how that doesn't destroy a person from the inside. Because, Margaret, it nearly destroyed me. It took me years of therapy to understand that your rejection of me didn't mean there was something wrong with me. It took me years to learn how to love myself despite knowing that the first person who should have loved me unconditionally decided I wasn't worth the effort. I felt like I was dying. Every word he spoke was a knife wound, and I deserved every single one of them. "You're right," I said. "You're absolutely right. I was a coward. I was selfish. I made the worst decision of my life, and I've regretted it every single day since." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Do you want to know what happened to me after you gave me away?" he asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was strong enough to hear it. "I was placed with a foster family," he said. "The Hendersons. They were good people, but they had 5 other children, and I was the difficult one. I was the blind one. I required special attention, special resources. Mrs. Henderson loved me, I think, but she was overwhelmed. My caseworker told me later that there had been some discussion about putting me in an institution. But then, when I was 4 years old, a man named James Patterson came to the foster home. He was looking to adopt, and he wanted a child with special needs. He said he wanted to prove that disability didn't limit possibility. He said he wanted to give a child a chance to live a full life." Marcus paused and took a sip of his coffee. His hands were steady, unlike mine, which were still shaking. "James adopted me," Marcus continued. "He was a teacher, and he was determined that I would go to school, that I would learn to read and write, that I would have every advantage he could provide. He taught me Braille. He taught me to navigate the world using a cane. He taught me that my blindness was a part of me, but it didn't define me. He taught me that I was worthy of love, even if my biological mother didn't think so." I started crying again. I was crying for the man who had raised Marcus, who had given him everything I couldn't give him. I was crying for Marcus, who had to work so hard just to believe that he was worthy of basic human kindness. I was crying for the years I had lost. "James passed away when I was 16, Marcus said. "Cancer. It was sudden, and it was devastating. But he had already given me the tools I needed to survive. He had already shown me that love was possible, that family was something you built, not something you were born into. When he died, I grieved him the way a son grieves a father. And I was grateful, Margaret. I was grateful that he had chosen me. If you've ever experienced loss or abandonment, I want to hear from you. Please share your story in the comments. How did you overcome it? What gave you strength?" "I went to university," Marcus continued. "I studied law because I wanted to help people who had been marginalized, people who had been told they couldn't succeed because of their disabilities. I wanted to use my life to make a difference. I met Helen in law school. We got married. We had 2 children, both of whom can see, and both of whom I've raised to understand that the world is full of people with different abilities, and that those differences are what make life interesting." He leaned forward then, and his voice became softer, almost vulnerable. "I had a good life, Margaret. Despite you, I had a good life. And for a long time, I didn't think I needed anything from you. I didn't think I needed to know you, or understand you, or forgive you. But then, about 6 months ago, my daughter asked me why I didn't have a relationship with my birth mother. She asked if I had ever tried to find you, and I realized that I had spent my whole life running away from you, just like you had run away from me. And I wondered if maybe it was time to stop running. I reached across the table and tried to touch his hand, but he pulled back gently. The gesture hurt more than any words could have. "I'm not ready for that," he said. "I'm not sure I'll ever be ready for that. But I'm here. I'm listening. And I want you to understand something, Margaret. I want you to understand that your fear, your shame, your weakness, they didn't just affect you. They rippled out through my entire life. They shaped who I became. They affected my ability to trust, to love, to believe in myself. So before we can move forward, I need you to understand the full weight of what you did." We talked for hours that afternoon, Marcus told me about his childhood, about the struggles he faced, about the moments when he felt like giving up. He told me about the times he cried himself to sleep, wondering why his mother didn't want him. He told me about the anger he felt as a teenager, the conviction that there must be something fundamentally wrong with him if his own mother couldn't love him. But he also told me about James Patterson, about the man who had chosen him, about the love that had saved his life. And somewhere in the telling of that story, something shifted. I could see that Marcus wasn't just angry at me. He was also grateful for the man who had raised him, and that gratitude had somehow transformed his pain into something meaningful. When we finally left the coffee shop, the sun was beginning to set. Marcus stood up and extended his hand to me, and this time, I took it. His grip was firm, and his skin was warm, and for just a moment, we were connected in a way that we had never been connected before. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said. "But I'm willing to try. That's all I can promise right now." I nodded, unable to speak. Helen came over and gently took Marcus's arm, and I watched them walk toward their car. Before they got in, Marcus turned back toward me. "I'll call you," he said. "I think we should talk again. But I need some time first. I need to process this." "Of course," I said. "Take all the time you need." I drove home alone, and for the first time in 51 years, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. The weight was still there, but it felt different. It felt lighter somehow, as if by finally telling the truth, I had given myself permission to be human again, to be flawed and broken and imperfect. What do you think about Marcus's decision to meet with me? Do you think he should forgive me? Please let me know in the comments what you would have done in his position. 2 weeks passed after that first meeting, and I didn't hear from Marcus. Every time the phone rang, my heart would jump, hoping it was him. Every time I checked my email, I was looking for a message from him. I tried to occupy myself with my usual activities, but nothing seemed to matter anymore. I had waited 51 years for the truth to come out. And now that it had, I couldn't go back to pretending. Sarah called me every few days to check on how I was doing. She was supportive, but I could hear the frustration in her voice. She wanted me to move forward, to stop dwelling on the past, to find some kind of peace. But peace felt impossible. I had spent my entire life running from Marcus, and now that I had finally faced him, I didn't know how to exist in a world where he might reject me completely. On the 15th day, my phone rang in the evening. It was Marcus. "Hi, Margaret," he said, and I could hear something different in his voice. It was softer somehow, less guarded. "Hi, Marcus," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "How are you?" "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me. "About how it wasn't about me. About how it was about your fear and your weakness. I've been thinking about that a lot, and I've realized something." "What?" I asked. "I've realized that I've been angry at you for 51 years for a decision you made when you were terrified and alone, and didn't have the resources to handle what was happening. And I've been blaming you for things that weren't your fault, while also forgiving you for the things that were your fault. It's been complicated." I didn't know what to say. I was afraid to hope that this meant he was willing to forgive me, but I was also afraid to assume that he wasn't. "I talked to Helen," Marcus continued. "I talked to my therapist. I talked to my children, and they all said something similar. They said that holding on to this anger is only hurting me. They said that maybe, just maybe, it's time to try something different." "What do you mean?" I asked softly. "I mean, I want to get to know you," Marcus said, "not as the woman who abandoned me, but as a person. I want to understand who you are now, what your life has been like, what made you the way you are. And I want you to get to know me. The real me, not the ghost of a baby you gave away. Can we do that?" I started crying again, but these were different tears. These were tears of hope, tears of gratitude, tears of a burden finally beginning to lift. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I want that more than anything." Over the next few months, Marcus and I began to build a relationship. It wasn't easy. There were awkward moments, conversations that went nowhere, silences that felt too heavy to bear. But there were also moments of connection, times when I felt like I was truly seeing my son for the first time. Marcus came to my house one Saturday afternoon. Helen brought him, but again, she gave us privacy. We sat in my living room, and I made tea, just like I had for so many guests over the years, but this was different. This was my son. "I want to tell you about James," Marcus said. "I want you to know him, even though he's gone. I want you to understand what he meant to me." And so Marcus told me stories about James Patterson. He told me about the day James came to the foster home and saw him sitting alone in the corner, and how James had knelt down and asked if he could be his friend. He told me about the first time James taught him to read Braille, how patient James had been, how he never made Marcus feel like he was behind or struggling. He told me about the Christmas when James gave him a bicycle adapted for blind riders, and how they rode it together through the neighborhood, with James running beside him, laughing. I listened to every word, and I felt a deep gratitude toward this man I had never met. This man who had done what I couldn't do. I also felt sadness, a profound sadness for all the moments I had missed, all the years that could have been mine with my son. "He talked about you sometimes," Marcus said. "Toward the end when he was sick. He said that adoption was a beautiful thing, but that he sometimes wondered if my birth mother ever thought about me. He said he hoped that one day, if you were still alive, I would have the chance to know you, to understand you, maybe even to forgive you." I couldn't speak. I was overwhelmed by the kindness of a dead man I had never met, a man who had loved my son in ways that I never could. "I think he would be happy to know that we're trying," Marcus said gently. Over the following months, Marcus introduced me to his family. I met Helen properly, and she was warm and welcoming, though I could see the protective wall she had built around my son. I met his children, Michael and Sophie, and I became their grandmother in a way that I had never been a mother. They were curious about me, asking questions about my life, my childhood, my marriage to Robert. I told them the truth. I told them about my fear, about my weakness, about the decision I had made that had changed the course of all our lives. I expected them to judge me, to reject me, but instead, they listened with the kind of compassion that only young people who have been raised with love can show. "Grandma Margaret," Sophie said to me one afternoon, "my dad says that you made a bad choice when you were scared, but he also says that you're trying to make better choices now. That's what matters, right? That we try to be better than we were yesterday?" I hugged her and cried, amazed at the wisdom of a 12-year-old girl who had more grace and understanding than I had managed in 84 years of living. Sarah came down from California to meet Marcus and his family, and it was strange to see my two children together, to see the resemblance between them, to understand finally what our family could have been if I had been brave enough to allow it. Sarah and Marcus got along well, and I could see that they were beginning to build their own sibling relationship, something that had been stolen from them at birth. One evening, Marcus called me with a proposal. He said that his law firm was working on a case involving education rights for children with disabilities. He said they were looking for stories, personal narratives from people who had been affected by discrimination or had overcome challenges related to disability. He asked if I would be willing to share my story. At first, I was terrified. The idea of going public with my shame, of allowing the world to know what I had done, felt impossible. But Marcus explained that it wasn't just about my shame. It was about raising awareness, about helping other families understand that disability doesn't have to be a barrier to love and connection, about showing people that even the darkest mistakes can lead to unexpected grace. "I want people to know that I'm not angry anymore," Marcus said. I want them to know that my life has been full and meaningful, not despite my blindness, but because of the love and support I received. And I want them to know that you're trying to make amends. I think that's a powerful story. So I agreed. I worked with Marcus's team to document my story, to put into words the journey that had brought me from shame to a fragile kind of redemption. It was difficult work, requiring me to examine every decision I had made, every moment of cowardice, every instance of weakness. But it was also healing. As I told my story, I began to understand something that I had never fully grasped before. I began to understand that my abandonment of Marcus wasn't just about me being a bad mother. It was about the times we lived in, about the lack of support for parents of children with disabilities, about the way society had taught me that a blind child was a tragedy rather than a blessing. It was about the way I had been raised to believe that perfection was possible, that any deviation from normal was a failure. None of that excused what I had done. Nothing could excuse that. But understanding the context of my choices made it easier to forgive myself, which, I realized, was something I desperately needed to do. If you or someone you know has a child with special needs, please share your experience in the comments. How have you found the strength to love and support your child despite the challenges? Marcus's law case was successful. The family at the center of the case won their battle to keep their blind daughter in public school, to ensure that she had access to the same education as her sighted peers. And my story, my journey from abandonment to attempted redemption, became a part of the public record, a testimony to the fact that things could change, that progress was possible. 1 year after our first meeting at the coffee shop, Marcus organized a family reunion. He invited me, Sarah and her family, Helen and their children, and even some of James Patterson's extended family, people who wanted to celebrate the legacy of this good man who had changed Marcus's life. We gathered in a park in Austin on a sunny afternoon in early spring. I brought a cake that I had baked myself, something I hadn't done in years. Marcus gave a speech about love and family, about the ways that family could be created through choice rather than blood, about the importance of second chances and redemption. When he finished speaking, he called me up to stand beside him. In front of everyone we loved, he said something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "Margaret," he said, "I want you to know that I have forgiven you, not because what you did was okay, but because holding on to my anger was only hurting me. You made a choice when you were young and terrified, and I've spent the last year understanding that choice, understanding you. And I've realized that the mother I have now, the woman who is trying to make amends, is worth knowing. I'm proud to call you my mother, and I hope you're proud to be my son." I embraced him, and I felt something inside me break open, something that had been locked tight for 51 years. I felt love, pure and uncomplicated and real. I felt the warmth of forgiveness, not just from him, but from myself. The afternoon continued with music and food and laughter. I watched Marcus play with his children, watched him navigate the park with confidence and grace, watched him live a life that was full and rich and beautiful. And I realized that he had succeeded not because of me, but in spite of me. He had become an extraordinary man, not because I had raised him, but because James Patterson had raised him with love and dedication. But I also realized something else. I realized that even though I couldn't change the past, I could influence the future. I could be present in Marcus's life now. I could be a grandmother to his children. I could use my story to help other families, to advocate for children with disabilities, to fight against the stigma and fear that had driven me to make the worst decision of my life. As the sun began to set over that park, Marcus came and sat beside me on a bench. He didn't say anything at first. We just sat together, watching the light change, feeling the warmth of the evening air. "Thank you," he said finally. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for being brave enough to face what you had done." Thank you for trying to make it right." "I should be thanking you," I said, "for giving me a second chance, for being willing to forgive me." "We both deserved second chances," Marcus said. "We both deserved the chance to know each other, and now we have that chance. And that's more than enough." 5 years have passed since that day in the park. I am 89 years old now, and I can feel my body slowing down, my energy diminishing with each passing season. The doctors tell me that I have perhaps another 5 or 10 years left if I'm lucky. I don't fear death the way I used to. In fact, I welcome it, knowing that when I go, I will go with a clear conscience and a heart full of love for the people who matter most to me. Marcus and I have built something real in these 5 years. We don't talk every day, but we talk regularly. I see him and his family at least once a month. I've become a fixture in his children's lives, the grandmother who bakes cookies and tells stories and listens to their problems with genuine interest and care. Michael, who is now 17, wants to go to law school like his father. Sophie, who is now 14, has become passionate about disability rights and wants to start a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families with children who have disabilities. I've encouraged them both, and I've shared my story with them many times. I've told them about the fear that drove me to abandon their father, about the decades I spent running from that decision, about the way forgiveness has transformed my life. And they've listened with the kind of patience and wisdom that makes me believe that my grandchildren will do more good in this world than I ever could. Sarah has also become closer to Marcus. They meet for lunch regularly, and they've discovered that they have more in common than they expected. Sarah told me recently that having a relationship with her half-brother has given her a sense of wholeness that she didn't know she was missing. Our fractured family, broken by my selfishness and fear, has somehow found a way to heal. But the most meaningful part of my redemption has been my work as an advocate. Marcus's law firm connected me with a nonprofit organization called Second Chances, dedicated to supporting families with children who have disabilities. I started volunteering there 3 years ago, and it has become the most fulfilling work I have ever done. I spend my days listening to parents who are terrified, who are grieving the loss of the healthy child they thought they were going to have, who are overwhelmed by the diagnosis and the medical needs and the uncertainty of the future. And I tell them my story. I tell them about my fear, about my weakness, about the decision that haunted me for 51 years. And I tell them that there is another way, that love is possible, that their child is not a tragedy or a burden, but a gift, even if they can't see it yet. Some parents listen, and their faces change. I can see the moment when hope begins to replace despair, when they start to imagine a future that includes their disabled child, a future full of possibility rather than limitation. And that moment, that transformation, is worth more to me than any other achievement I have ever accomplished. One mother, a woman named Elena, came to see me after attending one of my talks. She was crying, and she told me that her newborn son had just been diagnosed with autism. She said that she had been thinking about adoption, about giving him away, just like I had done with Marcus. She said that hearing my story had changed her mind, that she realized she couldn't run away from her fear, that she had to face it instead. "Thank you," Elena said to me. "Thank you for being brave enough to share your pain. You've given me the courage to be a better mother than you were, and that's the greatest gift anyone could give me." I cried with her that day, grateful beyond measure that my worst decision, my deepest failure, could somehow be transformed into something that helps someone else avoid the same path. Marcus has become known in Texas as an advocate for disability rights. He's argued several landmark cases that have expanded access to education and services for children with disabilities. He's written articles, given speeches, appeared on television to talk about his experience growing up blind and the importance of inclusive education and society. And always, he credits James Patterson, the man who raised him, the man who showed him that his disability was not a limitation, but simply a part of who he was. But Marcus also talks about me now. Not with anger or bitterness, but with a kind of compassionate understanding. He talks about how my abandonment forced him into the arms of a man who loved him deeply and completely, a man who might never have come into his life if I had been brave enough to keep him. He talks about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to the best things that could happen to us. My mother made a terrible choice, I've heard him say in interviews. But from that terrible choice, I was adopted by a man who changed my life. From that tragedy, I learned resilience. From that pain, I learned compassion. I am not grateful for the abandonment, but I am grateful for how I've been able to transform that abandonment into something meaningful. I am grateful for the chance to know my biological mother, to understand her, to forgive her, and I am grateful for the opportunity to use my life to help other people with disabilities live fuller, richer, more meaningful lives. One evening, about 3 months ago, Marcus called me with something he wanted to ask me. He said he was writing a memoir about his life, about growing up blind, about being adopted, about his journey into law and disability rights, and he wanted me to contribute to it. He wanted me to write a chapter about my experience as his biological mother, about the decision I made, about my decades of regret, about my path to redemption. At first, I was hesitant. The idea of putting my shame into writing, of allowing it to be published for the whole world to read, still frightened me. But I also understood that this was part of my redemption, that my story had value not because I was a good person, but because I had been a bad person who had tried to change, who had failed and failed and failed again, and then finally had succeeded in doing the right thing. So I wrote. I wrote about the hospital room where Marcus was born, about the moment the doctor told me about his blindness, about the fear that nearly consumed me. I wrote about the decision to give him away, about the guilt that followed, about the way that guilt became a part of my identity for 5 decades. I wrote about Sarah's discovery through DNA testing, about my first letter to Marcus, about that first meeting at the coffee shop in Austin, but most importantly, I wrote about what I had learned. I wrote about how I had come to understand that disability is not a tragedy, that children with disabilities can live full and meaningful lives, that love is stronger than fear, that redemption is always possible if we are willing to face our worst selves and try to become better. Marcus's memoir came out last year. It's called Seeing Beyond, and it tells the story of his life in his own words, with my chapter woven into the narrative. The book has been surprisingly successful. It's been reviewed positively in major publications. It's been picked up by disability advocacy groups and used in schools to teach children about diversity and inclusion. And my story, my shame, my redemption, has resonated with thousands of people. I've received letters from mothers who read about what I did and what I became, and who were inspired to stay with their disabled children instead of running away. I've received letters from people with disabilities who felt seen and understood for the first time. I've received letters from other people who had made terrible decisions and abandoned children or loved ones, and who found hope in my journey toward redemption. One letter came from a man who had abandoned his daughter when she was diagnosed with cerebral palsy 40 years ago. He wrote to tell me that after reading my story, he had found the courage to reach out to his daughter. She had refused to meet with him at first, but eventually they had a conversation. It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. And he wrote to thank me for showing him that it was never too late to try. These letters have become the most precious things I own. They remind me that even in the darkest moments of our lives, when we feel like we are beyond redemption, there is still hope. They remind me that our worst mistakes can be transformed into something meaningful, something that helps others, something that contributes to the healing of the world. Have you ever made a terrible mistake and found the courage to make amends? Please share your story in the comments. I want to hear from you. Your story might be the thing that gives someone else the courage they need. Last month, Marcus did something that surprised me. He organized an event at the University of Texas, a symposium on disability rights and parental decisions, and he invited me to be the keynote speaker. I was terrified. I had never given a public speech before. I was 89 years old, and I had spent my entire life trying to hide from shame, not to publicly proclaim it. But Marcus believed in me. He said, "Margaret, you have something to say that the world needs to hear. You have lived through failure and fear and guilt and regret, and you have come out the other side with wisdom and compassion. That's powerful. That matters." So I wrote a speech. I wrote about my journey from fear to redemption, about the importance of supporting parents of children with disabilities, about the way that love can transform even the darkest decisions into something meaningful. I wrote about Marcus, about the man he had become, about the legacy he had created, about the way that his life had redeemed my failure. On the day of the symposium, I stood in front of 300 people, mostly parents of children with disabilities, disability advocates, educators, and medical professionals. And I told my story. I told them about the moment I gave my son away, about the guilt that followed, about the decades I spent running from that decision. And I told them that I understood their fear, their despair, their sense that having a disabled child meant that their life was over. But I was wrong, I said to that audience. I was so terribly, profoundly wrong. My son's blindness did not ruin my life. My abandonment of him did. My refusal to love him unconditionally did. My belief that he was less than, that he was a burden, that he was something to be ashamed of. That is what caused damage. But my son, my beautiful, brilliant son, he has lived a life fuller than I could have ever imagined. He has accomplished things I could never accomplish. He has touched more lives, helped more people, made more of a difference than I could have made in 100 lifetimes. And it's not because he overcame his disability. It's because he accepted his disability and integrated it into who he is. And then he used that acceptance to help others. When I finished speaking, there was silence in that auditorium. And then people stood up, and they applauded. They applauded for me, for my honesty, for my willingness to share my shame. They applauded for Marcus, for the man he had become despite the worst possible beginning. They applauded for all the parents in that room who were struggling, who were frightened, who were trying to do better than they thought they could. Marcus was sitting in the front row, and I could see tears streaming down his face. When I came down from the stage, he stood up and embraced me, and he whispered in my ear, "Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for becoming who you needed to become." These 5 years since Marcus and I have reconnected have been the most meaningful of my life. I don't have much time left, I know that. My body is failing, and my days are numbered. But I am no longer afraid of death. I am no longer running from my past. I have faced what I did. I have apologized for it. I have tried to make amends, and I have been forgiven. I think often about James Patterson, the man who raised Marcus. I think about how his decision to adopt a blind child, his decision to love Marcus unconditionally, changed the trajectory of both our lives. I think about how he never knew me, but he saved me, because he saved my son. And my son's salvation became my salvation. I also think about the choices that I made, and the consequences of those choices. I think about how different things would be if I had been brave enough to face my fear that day in the hospital. If I had been strong enough to accept my son's blindness as simply a part of who he was. If I had been wise enough to understand that love was stronger than fear. But I also understand that I can't change the past. I can only learn from it, and try to use what I've learned to help others avoid the same path I took. That's why I continue to work with second chances. That's why I share my story. That's why I am standing here, at 89 years old, still trying to make things right, still trying to be the mother and the person that I should have been all along. Marcus has asked me to write a will, to ensure that when I pass away, my story is preserved, that the work I've done continues. I've left money to second chances. I've left my journals to Marcus, so that he can understand the depths of my guilt, but also the depths of my love for him. And I've asked that my funeral be open to the public, so that anyone who has been touched by my story, anyone who has found hope in my redemption, can come and say goodbye. I don't know what happens after death. I'm not sure if there's a heaven where James Patterson is waiting, where the versions of my past self that I could have been are living the lives I didn't have the courage to live. But I hope that when I die, I can die knowing that I tried. I tried to make amends for the worst decision of my life. I tried to be better. I tried to use my failure to help others succeed. And if that's all a person can do, I think that's enough. I think that's redemption. 1 week ago, I was sitting in my living room, looking through old photographs. I came across a picture of Marcus as a child, a photo that the adoption agency had given me when I signed the papers. I had kept it hidden for 51 years, tucked away in a box in my closet, unable to look at it, but unable to throw it away. I showed it to Marcus when he came to visit. I told him I had kept it all those years, that I had looked at it sometimes in the dark of night, remembering the child I had held for exactly 3 minutes before handing him over to someone else to raise. Marcus looked at the photo for a long time, and then he said something that I will remember for the rest of my life. "You know what I see when I look at this photo?" he said. "I don't see a mistake. I don't see a tragedy. I see a child who was loved, even if that love was complicated and tangled up with fear. I see the beginning of a journey that led me to James, that led me to Helen, that led me to my children, that led me to the work that I do. I see the beginning of a story that has meaning." And in that moment, I finally understood. My abandonment of Marcus was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. It was the catalyst that set in motion a series of events that led to redemption, to growth, to the creation of meaning from pain. I am Margaret, and I abandoned my blind son 51 years ago. But I am also Margaret, and I spent the last 5 years trying to make that right. I am Margaret, and I have been forgiven, and that forgiveness has set me free. When you're old and looking back at your life, you realize that the moments that matter most are not the moments of success or achievement. They are the moments when you faced your worst self and decided to become better. They are the moments when you reached out to someone you had hurt and asked for forgiveness. They are the moments when you accepted that you couldn't change the past, but you could influence the future. I don't know how much time I have left. The doctors say my heart is weak, that the years are catching up with me, but every day that I have left, I will use to love my son, to love my grandchildren, to love my daughter, to help the families who come through the doors of second chances. And when I finally close my eyes for the last time, I will close them knowing that I have been redeemed, that I have been forgiven, that I have made amends for the worst decision of my life. Marcus is here now, sitting across from me. He's reading a draft of this story, the story of his life and mine, the story of abandonment and redemption, and the power of second chances. And when he finishes reading, he's going to look up at me and smile, and he's going to say, "Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for becoming my mother." And I'm going to hold his hand, and I'm going to cry, and I'm going to know finally, completely, that I have been saved. Not by forgetting my sin, but by facing it. Not by running from my past, but by embracing it. Not by being the perfect mother I thought I had to be, but by being the flawed, broken, terrified woman who learned, finally, that love is stronger than fear. This is my story. This is our story. This is the story of a mother who abandoned her son, and a son who forgave his mother, and the extraordinary journey that brought us together again. And if my story can help even one parent understand that their child's disability is not a tragedy, that love is always possible, that redemption is always available to those willing to face their worst selves, then every moment of pain, every moment of guilt, every moment of shame has been worth it. I am 89 years old. I am Margaret, and I regret nothing about where I am now, about who I have become, about the love that fills my life, because I have learned what it took me a lifetime to understand, that the worst decisions of our lives can become the greatest teachers, and that forgiveness, given and received, is the most powerful force in the universe. Thank you, Marcus, for giving me a second chance. Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for being the son that I was too frightened to be the mother of. And thank you for showing me that even at the end of a long life, redemption is possible.